Hello, everyone. I want to make sure we're all set. So, welcome to the California School for the Deaf Core webinar. We are excited to have our first webinar of this school year. We will have more coming. My name is Catherine Licht. People know me also as Trina, and the T next to my nose is the name sign. And just to let you know, I am white with blonde hair, wearing a blue long sleeve shirt, and we are happy to have a special guest with us today. Her name is Rachel Zemek. She is also white and is wearing a light blue shirt with a necklace and has short red hair. I will introduce her in a minute. Our topic today is about her book, The Butterfly Cage. We are excited to welcome Rachel Zemek. My first question for Rachel is, what inspired you to write this book, The Butterfly Cage? This is Rachel. Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. There's so many things that have inspired me to write the book. It's really, it's kind of an onion. There's so many overlapping reasons, and it got to a point where I felt like I had to write this book. When I was in my 20s, I had decided I would write a book, but I didn't know what the topic was going to be. So I decided to wait, but I definitely wanted to share something personal with the world. And when I became a teacher, and that was after I raised my children, and I had gone to college for many years, and my journey had encompassed a lot. And when I started teaching at a mainstream school, and that was right when I got my deaf education credential, I was so excited and so optimistic about starting teaching. And I have to say my deaf identity was pretty weak at that point. However, in the 10 years of teaching in a mainstream school environment, teaching a deaf class of deaf students, I shifted. There was a shift. I went from optimism to despair. I was shocked at what I saw over and over again, in the classes, in the school. I realized in my 8th year of teaching that I needed to write a book. And then it became apparently clear in my 9th year of book. And then, so more things were happening. So for example, one student, I don't want to go into too much detail now because I want you to read the book. And once you read the book, you understand it, but I don't want to ruin that for you. So what happened to this one student, it compelled me to write this book. And another thing is that I found out I had cancer. I didn't know what my time frame was. How much time do I have left? And so I said, I have to do this. I can't put this off. And also, Patty Ladd, he came to the California School for the Deaf in 2013 and did a presentation in which I was there and saw him. And he said there's so many books about deaf people written by hearing people. However, where are the deaf books about deaf people written by deaf people? And he, told the audience, you need to write your book. And that gave me goosebumps. And that just hit me. I had just started teaching at the California School for the Deaf, and it compelled me to focus on writing the book right then. All of those things kind of came together to compel me to do it. This is Trina. Wow, that's quite a journey and heart-touching about the cancer as well and all those reasons for writing the book. But we thank you so much for writing it. It's really invaluable. My next question is, how can this book become a resource for parents and teachers? How can they use this book? This is Rachel. So for parents who are trying to decide where to place their kid, whether to have them attend a mainstream school or a school for the deaf, I think this book really shows what the differences are between those two educational settings and what that can look like, in a very close, upfront way. I had students who started with me in the mainstream school where I was teaching and then transfer over to the school for the deaf. And I include those stories in the book about those students where they're the same exact student in two different environments, and the impact that has on them is evident. I wanted to really kind of shine a light on seeing that, because I think parents don't know what's going on in their local mainstream school. It's not the parents or family's fault. They don't have any idea of what's going on, and they may just trust the school, trust the school staff to do the right thing for their child. And they have confidence that these are people who have deaf education degrees and they know what they're doing, and so they drop off their child and think it's fine, whereas that is really not the case. There's a lot that I saw going on in the schools, and I really wanted to kind of open the curtain and let parents see what's going on so they can make an informed decision for their child's education and not put off that decision. So deaf children cannot afford to lose any time, lose any years of education while the parents are figuring it out or coming to the realization like, oh, wait, maybe this school is not really serving my child. They can't lose a month. They can't lose days or years. So I wrote this book so that they could see that. As far as educators go, this book can help educators in the mainstream schools to provide that support and compassion and love is what I want them to get out of this. I don't want them to feel like they're alone because I know it can be a very lonely job. It can be a very isolating job. You can feel very set apart from the deaf world. I remember going through hell, and I wanted to provide that support and strength so that they can feel stronger going into work the next day and know that other people are experiencing the same thing that they are at their workplace. As far as educators who teach at the School for the Deaf, I wanted to raise the awareness. I wanted to remind them about all those teachers who are working in the mainstream and serving 85% of the deaf students. They are in the mainstream schools and they are suffering terribly. And some of the students may not survive their struggles. It is a serious situation. I wanted to shine a light on that for the educators in deaf schools so that they realize that they are part of the system and can do something and not just be in their bubble and become complacent and not know what's going on in the local mainstream schools, because those schools need those educators as well. This is Trina. I agree. I wanted to ask if you could pick one classroom example or experience, something that happened maybe during an IEP meeting, and where you're trying to explain to the parents or educators what's going on. Is there something from the book you can take, a challenge in the book that with deaf education that you could share? This is Rachel. I have so many. There's so many things that I saw, so many stories. And the list is endless. Which do I pick? That's tough. Overall, in the mainstream schools, something that deaf educators in a deaf school would see as a positive is seen as a negative in the mainstream schools. So the concept of deaf pride and feeling very positive about your deaf identity, or signing really well and having strong signing skills, that's seen as a positive. Whereas for educators in the mainstream schools, they see that as a negative. They want to get rid of those elements. They really believe that what they're doing is best. So there's a lot of conflicts that can happen. Here's an example. Like I said, there's many examples, but this is just one. What I saw where I was teaching is that I had an administrator who would like to wean deaf students off of their ASL interpreters. So sometimes a profoundly deaf student in a mainstream class, it's a large class of the majority being hearing students, and the administrator would take a look at that class and decide that the student need the interpreter. Maybe because the student wasn't looking at the interpreter 100% of the time, the administrator would write this down on the IEP that we will wean the student off their interpreter in 3 months. And families don't understand whether this is right or wrong or what the student really needs. There's no quality control in that environment. There's no input from the deaf professionals to say, oh, wait, no, that's not, you don't want to do that. Schools just kind of plow ahead and follow what they think is right. And that causes a lot of disruptions. One of the stories in my book, I had a kindergarten girl who was very bright, and she was in my class, and I was focusing on strengthening her American Sign Language and also doing reading and writing and math. And I remember just trying to just give her so much information, and I was following the state standards for math for her, and she was picking it up even though she had just recently started learning American Sign Language and had no previous language. But I could tell she was still bright and she was picking up the math. So she had 3 hours of my class every day, and that time was precious. I ended up taking a leave of absence from work at that point for a while. And when I came back, it was jarring. The administrator had made a lot of changes to the student schedule, and instead of being in the deaf class, they were just the only one student in a class full of hearing students. So that one girl that I mentioned, her IEP was coming up, and I went to meet with the teacher, and she had a young, new hearing teacher who had her in her class along with the other hearing students. And I said, "Oh, how is she doing? How is this deaf student doing? I was teaching her math. How is she doing with math?" I saw the classroom, and there was a circle of students working on math, and I said, "Oh, is she in that group?" "Oh no, your student's over here by herself in the other side of the room." I said, "What is she doing over there?" "Oh, she's drawing, she's coloring," the teacher said. I said, "Why is she coloring? Why isn't she doing math? Why isn't she in the math group and learning math?" And the teacher said, "Oh, we tried that, but it didn't work. And so now we're having her draw." "Oh, but," the teacher mentioned, "Oh, but she did say the word yellow." I was so shocked. It was completely off base. I'm like, the word yellow, what does that have to do with math? I didn't see any connection. I asked the teacher, "What do you mean yellow?" She's like, she was able to speak the word yellow perfectly. I said, "Yeah, but what about the math skills?" And the teacher said, "Oh, I'm not teaching her math." And that was her perspective. And the administrator had told her that my student was in the class for social and linguistic reasons, and that was ignored. Sorry, the interpreter had a frog in her throat, so we are trying to give her a chance to start over again. Sorry, we only have one interpreter today, and so that's a challenge that we face, in addition to the stories that Rachel tells in her books. But the interpreter crisis is an issue. We don't have enough interpreters in our community right now, so we appreciate the interpreter who's interpreting by herself. So sorry for that disruption. I think she's got something to drink, and then we'll go back to Rachel to finish her story. This is Rachel. So that student, how that mainstream teacher looked at her and how the administrator looked at her was completely different from how I perceived her. I saw her as competent and smart, and with an ability to learn math and get on track with her hearing peers. If she was given that, intensive instruction with sign and visuals and one-on-one support, I could see that she could thrive. Whereas they saw that she needed to learn how to speak. And that was a waste of her time, putting her in a corner by herself to draw and color. And that spoken ability, superseded everything else. And the teachers were super excited about that. And they were wasting her precious time on that. It was really tough. There's a lot of incidents like that occurred. The speech therapy, the occupational therapy, the mainstream teachers, the principals. So those speech therapists don't have, and teachers don't have a background in deaf education. And in that environment, there was no sense that a deaf person might know more about what a deaf child needs and to respect their opinion and ask them their opinion. It was actually the opposite. They wanted to have, they really prioritized spoken language. And they were the majority, those hearing educators and administrators. And they thought it was more important for the deaf child to be able to pass as a hearing child and be able to speak. And so they disregarded a lot of advice and being the minority in that situation, it was easy to dismiss the deaf perspective. And it was a dangerous environment for deaf children. Nobody else was able to see what was going on and speak up for those deaf students. And if, I spoke up, I was often squashed. My perspective was squashed. That's where I decided, okay, I have to write a book. That's as a last resort. This is Trina. So all that you saw as a teacher and all those situations and challenges, those experiences you saw, do you think only you saw that, or do you feel like that is just happening in mainstream programs all over the place? Do you think that other teachers have that same experience? This is Rachel. Unfortunately, I think it's very common, a very, very common experience. If I thought it was just my experience, it happened to be my specific school, or it was something about my personality, and I would had these conflicts, then I wouldn't have written the book. If it was just about me, that wouldn't make sense. But what I saw, for example, students who transferred into my class from other school districts, I saw those IEPs, and I looked at the IEPs, and they were worse than our IEPs. So it was clear that they were coming from an even worse school system. So I think there are a lot of school systems that are terrible, and it's not really their fault. They don't have the experience, they don't have the background, they don't have the history with deaf students. So a deaf student shows up at their school and they just kind of make it up and try and figure out what to do because they don't know what to do. And they don't know what they don't know. They look at the kid and say, okay, he seems happy, so we're doing great. And some schools are much better. I think there are some public schools that are doing a good job for deaf students. There's some. It's a small amount, a small number of those schools compared to like I said, there's some programs that are worse, but I think there's a lot of programs that are very similar to the education system I was in. And I think if there's a person with a strong deaf identity who's very proud of being deaf and uses ASL in the school system, they are going to clash with the existing system. Since I wrote the book and the book has been out, I've had a lot of people reach out to me. Oh my gosh, that's the same experience I had. One woman said, wait a minute. She was kind of upset because she said, oh, you wrote my story. I've already, I wanted to write my story. She thought they were just so similar. But unfortunately, it is a very common experience for deaf educators out there. This is Trina. So with that in mind, the different stories and examples that you write about in your book, how can we as readers discuss more about language deprivation, oralism, autism? Those are three major themes that show up in the book, throughout the book. How can we continue the discussion about those themes? Do we protest? Do we need to do some self-reflection? What is it that we can do to continue the dialogue? This is Rachel. I've focused just on one school in my book, but I hope people who read the book really do start to do some self-reflection and and look at the program in their school a little closer. And if there is no deaf program, go visit another school, visit different programs. I think when parents read the book, I want them to, scrutinize the school a little bit more and challenge the school a little bit more, to really kind of look a little further, to look more in depth and be a bit, unfortunately, a little less trusting and a bit more suspicious of the school's situation. I hope families maybe can see, okay, all right, is this my school the same as what Rachel's describing in her book, or is it different? If it's different, great. If it's the same, then that should bring up some concerns, and they may need to roll up their sleeves and do something about it. Some things happen in these types of schools where people in the deaf community are appalled and shocked at what's happening. One example is there was an interpreter in the mainstream classroom with 5 deaf students. After a while, I found out that the teacher, so there was 15 hearing students and 5 deaf students in that classroom, and I found out that the teacher tended to do a lot of group activities. Oh, I thought that's great. The deaf get to be in a group together with the interpreter. That's wonderful. But then I came to realize that no, that's not what was happening. The teacher was following the example of the administrator. And doing what she thought was correct for the deaf students, she would put one deaf student in each of the groups. So they were by themselves with hearing students, and there was only one interpreter in one of the group, meaning that those 4 other students in groups that had no access, they were trying to get the interpreter's attention. They didn't know what was being said in their group. So that situation occurs a lot. And it's pretty awful. I want to raise awareness about situations like this that ignore students' access. We need to know what we're dealing with. Parents may have no idea about what's going on, and I don't blame them for not doing more. And teachers may be doing what they think is best and coming up with, approaches. However, I want this book to be a wake-up call to both parents and educators. So that's my hope. This is Trina. Yeah, your book was really helpful in understanding those different experiences that happened to you personally and your students, and to allow us to really discuss and compare situations. What can we do to be involved and improve that? My last question for you. So just letting you know, for those of you watching, you are welcome to ask questions. We will have Q&A time. I'm going to look at your questions and assign them to Rachel. So my last question is, what do you hope your readers do after they finish your book? What do you want them to do next? This is Rachel. I think there's a lot. I think the average hearing person on the street who has no experience related with deaf education or deaf people, they would assume, oh, these deaf kids are great. They're in school. They're doing fine. Our education system, works for deaf kids. They would just assume that. It must be good. Why? Because they're seeing, they're seeing more positive deaf role models in media, and American Sign Language is in the news. It's much more visible. So it looks like the, deaf people are thriving. And maybe they've heard about cochlear implants and like, oh, okay, that seems great. And the average person's assumptions can be very incorrect. I don't want them to assume things are getting better. I want them to realize in a medical office, for example, or in a school where the staff may, have a set agenda or maybe an ingrained set of beliefs about what is best for deaf children in those settings, a lot of damage can occur. A lot of bad advice can be given to families and parents. So my hope for my book is if I can get this book out there and have just the you're a normal hearing person who knows nothing about deaf education or deaf people, to raise that awareness, to kind of change that assumption that, oh, everything is fine. But if, there's, some controversy or discussion about the book, The Butterfly Cage, if they come to find out about that, maybe they find out about the book on the radio through a podcast, or if they read the book themselves, I hope that average person would become an ally of the deaf community and be more invested in really knowing what happens with deaf kids, and think twice about the assumptions that they make, that these these children are gonna be fine. Trust the doctors, trust the schools. One big hope I have is right now I feel like the deaf community knows about the book, and the response has been wonderful, and it's been great to have their support. And the fact that people in the deaf community are reading it, and I know it triggers trauma for a lot of deaf people. That wasn't my intention, but it is an outcome of the book. But I also want hearing people who know nothing about deaf education to read the book as well, so that they are not victims of their own ignorance. I also want everyone to learn American Sign Language. If everybody learned American Sign Language at any age, hearing, deaf, hard of hearing, whatever, everybody learned it and took some American Sign Language classes and studied it. The impact on the deaf community, the deaf students, there would be no barriers. Right now there are barriers constantly, but if those barriers were to go away, everything would change. That is my, a huge wish, learning ASL. It's an amazing language. It's worth learning. So do it. Yeah. Oh, one administrator that I was at a conference. I was at the Cal Ed conference recently, and this is the California Education Deaf Educators Conference. An administrator that I didn't know just came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm running a deaf program. It's quite a large program for deaf students. It's been total communication, which kind of means signing and talking at the same time. And this administrator was saying she's trying to figure out what to do. She did read my book, and as a result of reading my book, she decided to go to a bilingual ASL English approach. And so, wow, I've already seen that the book can have an impact and can make real change. So I'm hoping there will be more people out there like her reading the book and who are open and humble enough to take that in, to really take in the message from the book and make real change. Wonderful, thank you. This is Trina. We have some questions in our Q&A chat. I'm going to go ahead with the first question that's a little bit related to what you were just saying. One question is, our school district is really looking for experienced teachers to teach our deaf students, but we have not had qualified applicants in the last 3 years. Part of the program is that some of the universities providing deaf and hard of hearing teaching credential programs in our state have closed. How do we attract deaf and hard of hearing teachers? Our school is too far for families to go to the California School for the Deaf. This is Rachel. Oh, wow, that's a wonderful question. And I appreciate your openness and your attempts to do the right thing for your deaf students. It's tough because the way the system is set up, hearing people are the ones making decisions, and a lot of universities are shutting down, or programs are shutting down within these schools. And I hope people who are watching this webinar and people with legal backgrounds to fight to make sure that schools and programs for deaf students and adults stay open, and so that we have that diversity. I know, here at the California School for the Deaf, it's very difficult to get a living wage to be able to live in the Bay Area. So those are challenges, but setting that aside, as far as your students go, you're on the right track, trying to hire, qualified deaf education professionals. So that's wonderful already. A lot of mainstream schools, put barriers against. They purposely prevent teachers who themselves are deaf from getting jobs. And so I would say to you, don't give up. Stick with this. Stick with trying to find the right educators. If other states have programs for deaf education, maybe offer a stipend so that students from that program can come to your area. That may be worth it. So you may see the students really thrive as a result of having a deaf educator. For now, if you can hire a hearing educator who has background in deaf education, who can sign, who has been trained by deaf people, maybe from the California State University Northridge or Gallaudet, a hearing person can be a wonderful ally and can be a wonderful teacher if they have the right perspective and approach. Also, there are many resources out there. If you reach out to the Schools for the Deaf, I understand your student's too far from the School for the Deaf, but you can certainly reach out to the School for the Deaf and ask for help and resources. and support for your program so that you can, do what you can. So I suggest reaching out. So right now here at the California School for the Deaf, the staff here really want to support teachers in the mainstream programs. So reach out to them, be persistent. Or, reach out to other deaf schools. So be persistent and keep doing that, your research, keep finding videos, books, have guest speakers, anything you can do to really expose your students to deaf role models and such. So good luck with that. Yes, this is Trina. Yes, the California School for the Deaf CORE, which is the Curriculum Outreach Resources and Education Department, are here to support you. You can check out our website to get more information on the resources that we have regarding education challenges. We are here with you. My next question is, how did you come up with the title, The Butterfly Cage? This is Rachel. I was considering title for several years and nothing felt quite right. One day, the name, Butterfly and Blood came to me and I was like, oh, that's great. I like that name. I was really thrilled with that title. And I was telling other people and friends of mine and editors and the people involved in writing the book and those in my social circle. And I said, I think Butterfly and Blood, I think that's a good title. And half of them were like, what? They hated that title. They're like, no, that's not the right title. And the other half were like, oh, okay, yeah, I like it. So I was kind of torn. So I had that in the back of my mind, like, okay, that doesn't seem like quite the right fit. I need to still look for a better title. So I was waiting for it to come up. The butterfly kind of epitomizes the deaf student. So they start off as a caterpillar, and, if you expose them to ASL, they can turn into this beautiful butterfly using sign language and flourish. And the school system is the cage that keeps them. Even though they're this beautiful butterfly, it keeps them in a cage until they can somehow escape and thrive. So that was where the title came from. I didn't want a boring title. I didn't want teaching in the mainstream schools. One editor encouraged me to do that, and I was like, no, I don't want that. I wanted an interesting title. This is Trina. That title, The Butterfly Cage, makes a lot of sense. How can we convince the SELPA directors to consider the California School for the Deaf as the correct placement for deaf and hard of hearing students? This is Rachel. Wow. That's a very important question. And maybe the most important question here. Let's see. One brief answer is to, give the SELPA directors my book, have them read the book. For people who've already read the book, there's one student who shows up throughout the book, and he shows up at the beginning and he shows up at the end a lot, and I consider that student kind of the canary in the coal mine. He's the thread throughout the whole book, and sometimes I just wanted to shake the administrators and the SELPA directors, and I just wanted to shake them, like, wake up, like, can you just imagine somebody who is dear to you, a child in your life, somebody who you love a lot. Could you imagine if they were this student, this boy that I'm referring to in the book? And when you read the book, you'll understand what I mean. If that was your son, is it worth it to keep deaf students in hearing schools just trying to be hearing and following what hearing staff say and hearing administrators say and following those opinions and those people who consider themselves experts in education? Is it worth them keeping their jobs? Is it worth it, is my question. To potentially lose a beautiful human being as a result of those practices? I think SELPA directors don't know what they don't know. They're used to thinking in terms of budgets and, managing the finances, and they listen to administrators who are hearing, but they don't listen to deaf professionals and administrators. So there's a lot that they do not know. So it's important to share that, So we talk about racism and sexism and ageism. We, as a society, are aware of those. We've heard of, sexism, racism, ageism. We've had exposure to those concepts. Whereas autism, society is completely unaware of the autism that occurs. They've never thought about that. If SELPA's directors have a personal connection, that may help them kind of wake up to that autism and have that term autism become more widely known. That's another purpose of my book. I want people to be discussing autism that occurs, and to wake people up to that concept and have that in the back of their mind. It's tough that a lot of school districts are focused on saving money instead of focusing on, or they're focused on their power. They're focused on the hearing, majority. And that's wrong. I really want to shift that with my book. This is Trina. Yes, with your book, here's a question. Somebody wants to know if you've promoted this book to organizations like the Chronicle of Higher Education. I know it's not related to elementary education. However, organizations like this that are out there, other than CEASD, this is Rachel. I'm still learning how to promote this book the best I can. I'm on my own here. It's a big endeavor. It's a big learning curve that I've been figuring out. There's a lot that I haven't done to promote my book, but I am wanting to, I'm willing to, I'm ready. When marketing a book, there's different avenues, and those avenues are endless for marketing the book. So I'm trying to do what I can. However, I like that idea. That's a very good idea. I have not pursued that, and I should. This is Trina. Here's another question about your book. The question is, will this book be printed in other languages like Spanish? This is Rachel. Yes, definitely. I want this to be printed in Spanish. Most of my students were from Spanish-speaking families, and many of them did not have English competency. And the book is pointless if I can't get it into the hands of those families. I want to be able to, I want them to have access to this book. So right now I am looking for a translator. I want somebody who knows about deaf issues and has fluency in both English and Spanish. So definitely. And I also would like to make an audiobook for people who don't tend to read books but tend to listen to the books. So yes, that is something I'm trying. I don't know about other countries, but yeah, I would, other languages. How exactly to do that, I don't know. This is Trina. Wonderful, thank you. I know there's more questions here. I'm going to save those questions and we will respond in email because we're running out of time. I want to take the last few minutes to thank you all for attending the webinar today. CORE is here to support you and provide resources. Feel free to contact us anytime. We have a wealth of deaf education resources. Our next webinar will be in January. It's about BGC curriculum. The book, Rachel's book, talks about a curriculum that's no longer used, so I thought this would be a good time to talk about a new curriculum that maybe school programs would like to adopt. So thank you again for watching and happy holidays. Thank you, Rachel Zemek. And thanks to our interpreter who is providing spoken language. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye. Rachel says bye. Thank you for letting me come. It was an honor.